Honorable Ministers, Chairman of the UBRA Board and members, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back in Kampala, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work that we are doing and some of the lessons from that work. I work with a firm called Pinbox, which is actually an acronym for Pensions in a Box. We work on digital micro-pension inclusion. We're currently engaged in about a dozen countries, about half of that in Africa and half of them in Asia. Let me quickly, this photograph was actually a Juakali member, a member of the Juakali Federation, and he was one of the people that we met when we were doing some feasibility work with FSD Uganda and UBRA on the feasibility of implementing a micro-pension program. So typically this is how the picture on social protection typically looks, regardless of which country we talk about, whether it's India or it's Kenya or it's Uganda for that matter. We typically end up seeing about 10% on average of the workforce which is salaried, public or private sector employees, and about 90% of the workers are self-employed, non-salaried workers. At a headline level, this looks like a fairly large problem, and the 90% unfortunately are not normally saving for retirement for a range of reasons. I mean, either they think that their children will take care of them, or it's not really occurred to them that it should be important to save for retirement. And in countries like Uganda, which is one of the youngest countries in the world, this is an even greater problem, because most people are in their late teens or early 20s, and retirement really looks very, very far away. At my age, when I'm shaving in the morning, I can see retirement reflected in the mirror. But for most people in Uganda, for instance, it's not going to look real enough, and I think that's a bit of a problem. And children, I think we are seeing increasingly across developing countries, are not necessarily a very reliable portfolio for a 20-year retirement. So, and if you look at this problem, it's almost like climate change. We've got a gigantic population of 90% of the workers who are not covered by pensions, who are not benefiting from the good work that Richard is doing, for instance, and who are now slowly walking towards 20 years of extreme poverty in their old age. And if this is not resolved now, then in 2050, when we will have 2 billion people above the age of 60 worldwide, and 1.7 billion will be living either in Asia, Africa, or Latin America, at that stage, it's going to be too difficult. It's going to be an irreversible problem. And I don't think countries will have the fiscal headroom to be able to pay a meaningful pension when these people are old. So when you do a slightly deeper dive on the landscape, what you realize is, at a disaggregated level, the picture is not just simply 10 and 90. While that is the problem, but if you do a slightly zoom in a little bit, you realize that there is also an MSME sector which is growing quite rapidly in many countries, but that normally represents 10 to 20% of the workers who usually are not participating in mandatory programs. I saw yesterday, we had the pleasure of calling on Richard and seeing some of the work that NSSF is doing. And we are seeing that NSSF, for instance, is deploying a lot of technology to go down and to be able to implement the new law, which now forces people who have even one employee to actually start contributing with them for the retirement. But it will take effort to so. But there is this 10 to 15% of the workforce which is in the MSME sector, which could then be covered. And then there is also about half the population normally in most countries which is young, economically active, and could perhaps afford to save for retirement as long as they were given a good reason to do so, and as long as it was easy to do so. And then there will be this, the roughly 30% or a third of the workers in most developing countries, including India where I am from, who will be too poor to save, or who will already be nearing retirement, and for whom, or who might be retired already, and for whom a contributions-based pension program just doesn't work. And if you really think about it, therefore I think for the people who are already covered, as Richard was saying, I think adequacy becomes an important issue, and I think strategies around taxation, around supplementary savings, and and so on and so forth, could actually be leveraged to increase the retirement benefits of this particular population. The second, of course, is to then expand mandatory coverage. And the first set which comes to mind is the MSME sector. So how can we then mandate participation, and how can we set up systems to enforce compliance? The third, of course, is the people who are young and have the capacity to save. How can we encourage and enable such people to start saving for themselves? Can we show them a crystal ball which helps them to understand that they are facing a 20-25-year retirement and they would need a large amount of money to be able to take care of their needs? And I guess there will always be this 1/3 of the population which at some stage the government will need to step forward and use fiscal resources to be able to support people in their old age because they don't have enough savings, or they don't have any savings at all. So can this approach really work? And we've seen this. Many countries today are actually doing this. A couple of countries that come to mind which have done this more recently, India is one of them. So India has pension exclusion is a big problem. We've got more than 400 million people in the informal sector who are not saving for old age. And this population was brought into a voluntary savings environment through a micro pension program launched by the government in 2010. By early this year, we have 40 million people in that scheme. It's still small, it's only 10% of the workers, but they've contributed $125 billion of long-term savings in the process. Rwanda, which is in our neighborhood, launched a program a micro-pension program, again for informal sector workers. In the last 3 years, they've managed to get about 2 million people, which is about a third of the Rwandan workforce, actually contributing for their retirement. There will be challenges, I'm sure, of adequacy, but people are saving, and they've accumulated almost 40 billion francs in the last 3 years. Now, if I sort of now zoom in a little more on Uganda, this is based on some of the work that we've had the privilege of doing with the pension regulator, UBRA, between 2017 and 2021. What we find is, in Uganda, as in most other countries, 90% of the workers are indeed informal. The UN projects that there will be about 5.5 million people above the age of 60 by 2050. If we don't do anything today, then 90% of these 5.5 million people will be poor when they're old, and paying them even a $2 a day kind of a pension, which in 2050 may not seem sufficient, will end up costing, at a lifetime level, will end up costing about $70 billion, which clearly will be unsustainable, but more importantly, it will be at the cost of other essential government expenditures on health and infrastructure and education and so on and so forth. But if we did do something, and if we could do what Richard is doing, for instance, in increasing contributions and bringing in, high returns to retirement savings, then there is a good possibility that people who save even, say, $50 a day for their retirement, if somebody is, say, 20 years old today, that person could actually achieve a $300 inflation index pension for 20 years starting at 60. And if we did this at some scale, if, say, we got even 10% of the current informal workers who can afford to save to actually do so, and if they started saving, say, $50 a day, even 10%, then you're looking at $5.5–6 billion of new long-term savings that can actually emerge, which I suspect is going to be roughly the size of the assets under management in NSSF. I won't go into this in detail, but women, when we are thinking about pensions, require special attention. I mean, women tend to live longer than men, and therefore they need much more savings than men to sustain themselves in old age. But they also have more compromised situations when it comes to saving for retirement, including lower incomes, frequent interruptions in their workforce, and so on and so forth. But clearly we need to think more clearly about. So women clearly need some greater thinking. The good thing as far as Uganda is concerned, and I think in some cases, and I'm talking from my experience working with a dozen countries now, Uganda clearly is fairly ahead of the pack at a number of levels. And I think one of the levels is that at a policy level, it seems quite clear to us that the policy framework required to proceed with expanding pension coverage and improving social protection in Uganda That framework already exists. And I think the regulator has proactively been working with the FSD, with World Bank, and by itself in examining the feasibility of implementing the policy roadmap that has already been well defined by the government. So what I was saying was, if you look at where we are, the building blocks required to expand pension coverage quite radically are already there. You've got not only the pension regulator, which has set up a really good governance framework, and I'm sure that my colleague from the IOPS will also ratify this, that the governance framework that UBRA has set up is actually very strong, and it compares with the best practices worldwide. But not only the regulatory and governance framework in pensions, but equally the frameworks set up by the Bank of Uganda, the insurance regulator, the Capital Markets Authority. All the regulators put together have actually created a very well-regulated digital finance ecosystem. Institutions like NIRA have set up a national ID system, a digital national ID system, which can be leveraged for issuing digital pension accounts and for mapping digital pension accounts for the next few years till people actually retire. We're seeing a fairly large penetration of digital, of smartphones and whether it's social media adoption and so on and so forth. So today, for instance, you have 8.5, 9 million people in Uganda who are youngsters. Probably some of them are the guys who are developing the app that Richard is worried about. But those are the guys who are sitting around actually using smartphones and social media and WhatsApp and so on and so forth. And these are very upwardly, they're thinking clearly about improving their lives and so on and so forth. And then you have a large population of young workers who are capable of saving for old age. And finally, of course, there is a large outreach through banks and other financial institutions who can actually play an important role in delivering the program to workers. So in that context, and looking at that ecosystem, one of the ways that UBRA thought about, and this is a blueprint that I've taken from some work that we had done with UBRA. So the idea is, if the ecosystem exists, if the National ID Authority exists, if pension funds exist, if institutions like NSSF exist, or insurers, custody banks, the entire ecosystem is there, then can we bring it together? Can we use secure APIs to leverage and integrate this ecosystem to provide all Ugandan citizens a very easy, simple, single window way of being able to set up a pension account in under 2 minutes using their mobiles from wherever they are in the country? And I think it's feasible using the infrastructure that is already there, including the payments infrastructure that the Bank of Uganda has set up. It is possible then for people to set up pension accounts and then to use digital wallets, Airtel Money or M-Pesa or whatever they want, to be able to regularly put money into their pension accounts without any challenges. And if this kind of a platform is set up, and we were talking about innovation. So in India, for instance, today, through a global partnership with WhatsApp, we've created a system where people are able to use WhatsApp to set up a pension account within a couple of minutes. In Kenya, in our neighborhood, people are doing that. They're able to use their WhatsApp to open a pension account, chat with the pension administrator remotely, and check their account balance, get a statement, file a claim, file a complaint, and all of this is happening digitally. We don't have to convince people to download an app. We don't have to teach them how it works. It works in any language. And so today, if this kind of a system was existing, then it is feasible for the government to stand up and say, today, all Ugandans, whether you have a smartphone with WhatsApp or you have a feature phone with USSD, now have the ability to set up a pension account in under 2 minutes from wherever you are, using whatever device at any point of the day. I think in this there is a role for the government, and the role for the government really is at 3 levels, which is really on the public goods side, where private institutions will neither have the resources nor the incentives to actually invest in this. The first is, of course, the establishment of an appropriate regulatory, legal, and governance framework. And what we've seen over the last 4 years that we've been studying the environment here in Rwanda, and to your point, ma'am, I think there is this we can probably put a tick mark on. This, I think, is something that is already done. Perhaps it needs a little more review or a little more thinking, but the pieces on the regulatory side are in place. The other thing is, of course, we need to actually make some noise and start engaging with citizens and convince them about the importance of saving for old age. I was at the university yesterday, and I was talking to some of the professors there. And I think it's feasible for us to start motivating youngsters and start talking to them about not only the importance of saving for old age, but the magic of compounding. And the third, I think that's an important area. It's optional, but I've seen countries achieve good outcomes, which is to provide fiscal incentives. And I think, again, this is only what the government can do, but provide fiscal incentives. So in many countries, the rich get tax benefits when they save for old age. And I think it's fair for governments to incur similar expenditure, like, by foregoing, which they incur for the rich, by foregoing tax revenue, to incur some expenditure to encourage voluntary thrift and self-help by informal sector workers who may not be taxpayers. And we've seen countries, including India, which did this in the earlier years, and they managed to get a lot of traction in the form of, mass-scale account activation and sustained savings for old age, purely because there were some co-contributions. And a farmer was told by the government that you don't have an employer, I'm going to step into the employer's shoes. For every dollar that you save, I'm putting 50 cents into your pension account. And I think that helped a lot. Thank you very much. I won't take more time. The moderator has been very generous. And I thank you for your patience and for your time.